We live in a time of global transformation. The Energy Futures podcast explores how we can accelerate the expansion of clean energy technologies and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. From heating and cooling our homes to moving around our planet and beyond, we bring together researchers, scientists, business leaders and communicators to exchange knowledge and try to answer one important question. How can we create a sustainable energy future for all? This podcast is produced by Energy Futures Lab of Imperial College London.
In this episode, Dr. Aidan Rhodes, a research fellow at Imperial College London and Energy Policy Briefing Papers fellow at Energy Futures Lab, explores the role of consumers in the transition to a net zero energy system. His guest, Tom Lough, practice manager at Energy Systems Catapult and an expert in energy strategy, policy and regulation, brings extensive experience from both the government and industry in unlocking net zero innovation. They delve into the role of consumer participation and engagement in achieving net zero, including the benefits and challenges, the impact of flexibility measures like smart appliances, time of use tariffs, and renewable assets on energy bills and system efficiency, ensuring equity and trust in the energy transition, addressing the needs of vulnerable consumers, and empowering local communities.
Welcome back to another episode of our Energy Futures podcast. So I'm Aidan Rhodes, I'm a research fellow here at Imperial College London in the Energy Futures Lab, and I'm joined by Tom Lough. And we're going to talk about the Mission 2030, basically, the government's 2030 target, which is extremely ambitious, and how it's going to affect consumers, how it's going to affect people's daily lives, and what sort of interesting opportunities as well are going to be happening for energy suppliers, energy companies, and energy consumers themselves. So, Tom, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what you do?
Well, thanks very much for inviting me on. My name's Tom Lough, and I'm in the Energy Systems Catapult. We're an innovation centre based in Birmingham, but kind of covering the country and actually also international work. And we really focus on sort of taking a kind of a whole system approach to tackling decarbonisation problems. It's really exciting place to work as someone that's kind of got a history of working in the energy space, because we've got different people from different kind of parts of different capabilities looking at the problems in different ways. For example, we've got this great model called ESME, which you might have come across. Which is a great way of kind of looking at how the energy future might look with different scenarios. And then we've got a thing called the Living Lab as well, where we've got sort of a bunch of real, to 3,000 or so real consumers around the country who take part in experiments to improve kind of energy solutions. So it's an exciting place to be.
Yeah, no, I've used ESME before, actually, in some of my work years ago, looking at basically modelling the UK's energy pathways. It's a great tool. Yeah. And you're funded mainly by the UK government, is that right?
Well, it's a mixed funding model. So traditionally, we were funded through Innovate UK, which comes from central government. But increasingly, we've been diversifying to more commercial opportunities. So we do quite a lot of consultancy. So now we've got that mix of funding.
So you really diversified out,
No,
and grown, I guess.
Yes, and grown quite significantly. I mean, I joined a few years ago, and we have sort of probably just under 200 now. There's pressing 300, maybe more. So it's getting big.
Yeah, excellent. So it's great to have you here, and of course this growth is really important because, as I'm sure you're all aware, we've had a change in government, and the new Labour government has accelerated what was already quite an ambitious target to decarbonise the power system by 2035 into one to get it to net zero by 2030, which is now slightly more than 6 years away. So it's quite incredibly ambitious, actually. I think we'll be the first certainly developed country in the world to get to a fully decarbonised power system, certainly one of our size, and certainly coming from a major gas-fired and indeed previously coal-fired background. So What are your views on this challenge, Tom?
Yeah, well, I think it's it's an incredible challenge, and it's really something that I think is going to drive a lot of action. I've heard it described quite a lot when people talk, including the National Energy System Operator, as Herculean, as an ambition.
It's a good word, that.
Which is a very good word. And then actually, I'm pleased I managed to say it properly last time. Last time I struggled with that word. But heroic, I suppose, is another way of describing it. And
in the proper Greek sense, as in superhuman.
Well, exactly. And I think. In some ways, that's exactly what you need. You need this really ambitious target, and even if you don't get all the way there, it gets you a long way to where you need to get to. I think there are some caveats to that though, because if you do end up kind of pressing for things that then you maybe distract yourself from other important reforms that you need to do, then they could come back and bite you in the future.
So maybe we're trying to basically do the system as is, rather than, I guess, doing some groundwork and then maybe doing it in more.
Yeah, that's the. I think so. Yeah, I mean, there are. I mean, we can maybe talk about this later, but there are some big reforms that are probably necessary, and we think actually are necessary to the market. That if you say, well, we can't change the system now, we've got to just press on, get our heads down, just build, then you end up with problems. And I'll give an example of that. I think the report that was produced by the National Energy System, Energy System Operator,
a few weeks ago, didn't it?
It came out, a few weeks ago, and the headline was, yes, we can do it, but when you look at the detail. Yes, I think it is possible, but it requires a lot of things, basically everything, lots and lots of very difficult things to go well. So good to have that ambition. We've got to try and get that to happen. But also, it says that there's going to be too much, but not enough electricity, which is a funny way to describe it. But I'll try and unpack that. Yeah. So. The too much is that we're actually going to be, if we do all of the things that we said, we're going to be producing much more than we need at certain times. Part of that's going to be exporting, so we're going to be sending quite a lot to our neighbours. And part of that, though, is going to be just turning off the renewables when we can't physically get it onto the grid. Yeah. That's the too much. And then the not enough is actually some of the really difficult challenges of electricity are around, and this is the sort of the times in winter, perhaps like days like today.
Well, days like today, I mean, is the Dunkelflaute.
Exactly.
The famous German word, which I believe stands for dark still period, dark cold period, something like that.
Exactly. And it's those sort of times that where there isn't really that there aren't answers for in this report. So we will still have to be relying on or other methods to give us energy or electricity at those times.
So we won't. Yeah, I guess this is where the net zero comes in. We'll be getting as close to zero as possible, but we will still need some gas-fired systems on the grid for times like today, as you say.
Exactly. Well, actually, I mean that's part of the net zero. But if we really want to be net zero, then we've got to be taking it out of the grid as well.
This is where you need CCS, bioenergy, and CCS even maybe some sort of negative way.
Yeah. So I think that creates some challenges, and I'd say probably for me, I mean, there are some really impressive big headline targets in there. I think offshore wind is probably the one that comes off first, which is really big. we're on about 14-15 gigawatts kind of at the moment, if the wind's blowing in the right direction. That's amazing. I mean, coming from a standing very for nothing basically to that is hugely impressive. But then in 6 years or so, getting that to 50 gigawatts is another order of magnitude.
That's quite astonishing. And the supply chain required, the workforce required, just the steel and ships required to put the foundations in, and the people required to put them in. That's just a huge amount, a huge increase, isn't it?
Exactly. And then the other one that is sort of something that I've worked on quite a lot in the past is transmission lines and the grid, the electricity grid. And the figure I pulled from the document was that we'll need 1,000 kilometres more of transmission lines, which, if you think about it, is possibly even more extraordinary than the offshore wind. I mean, the offshore wind is amazing, but if you've got the supply chain and you've got the kind of the consents and everything like that, it's in the sea, so you just get on and do it. But 1,000 kilometres of overhead lines in places where people often don't want them is a big challenge, and I think that's some of the stuff that we might want to talk about a bit. Is that kind of how do we bring people with us so that we can actually get that stuff built?
Yes, it could be, because exactly. I'm sure everyone's seen the news over last year, especially up I think Norfolk and Suffolk, talking about putting in a large transmission line to basically connect the offshore wind in the North Sea over.
Yeah. No, exactly. And when in previous job, I was in government working on sort of onshore electricity networks, and it was at the early stage of some of the lines in that area. And there was real passion from people locally saying, we just don't want this. It's beautiful countryside. We don't want this stuff to be built. And of course, in some places it will have to be, and it's just a question of how do we, what's the kind of what's the formula for allowing this to happen and actually helping bring people with us in those areas. So
is the government changing the rules around planning consent? Because one of the major what I've heard sort of blockers is the amount of time it takes to get consent for these big lines. So if we did want 1,000 kilometres of big line by 2030, we haven't got them now, and there's going to be a lot of opposition. Is the government going to be streamlining this? Is it changing this in any way?
Yeah, so I think for housing, for energy, for lots of areas, there does need to be reform to the planning system, and I think that's the right thing to do. And also, we've seen already decisions have been made by this government to kind of just press on and do the things that it says and it knows that it needs to do. That it's easier said than done, though, that change in planning, because ultimately you could come in with a really strong strong central policy and strong powers and just kind of make things happen. The obviously, what's the challenge of that? Well, so you get some very unhappy people, and ultimately, is that going to be viable? And could it actually bring down the net zero kind of sort of target?
Yes, public acceptance needs to be there in order. And people, I think this is the one of the big questions: how to bring people along with you on this journey. If you want to put in 1,000 kilometres more lines, 50 gigawatts of wind turbines, if you want to encourage people to install heat pumps, encourage people to change their car to an electric vehicle, this requires a large amount of the public need to be on the side. I guess let's start with sort of planning this. If say you lived in a village where someone says, I want to stick this massive pylon half a mile from you, you'll be able to see it from your back garden, but it's not going to affect you in any way. But obviously you like your view from your back garden. So how could the government, what sort of tools could we use in order to bring those people along, basically?
So I think that whatever I say, there will be certainly people for good reasons that won't accept that.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to convince everyone, right?
And I think we have to accept that, but I think we have to be reasonable as well. And one sort of soft or relatively easy win is about kind of giving people compensation. So yes, it's going to cost a bit of money. It costs a lot of money to build these things, but giving the people that sort of bear the brunt of it compensation, I think is a price worth paying.
Yeah.
If it then allows people to think, well, actually, yes, as a community, we feel that this is something that we've have to live with, but actually, as a community, we've benefited from it. And so the ways that can be done at the moment, maybe it might be investing in things locally. It might even be investing in local energy assets, like giving people local sort of solar or wind. Yeah. I think what's more challenging, and I think what's really needed, and this is where I think that market reform is important, is that actually you really want people to be able to benefit through lower energy bills, and that's really quite hard at the moment. There are ways, and some suppliers like Octopus are providing cheaper electricity to people who have a wind farm nearby, for example. But with that kind of big infrastructure, it doesn't quite work like that. So I think that there's a market reform that would allow that kind of more sort of nuanced approach would be better.
So people can actually see the advantages of renewable energy in their pocket.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And if you could do that, then you'd have a much more direct kind of feeling of of benefit from it.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously we do already have thousands of kilometres of electricity pylons across the UK, and they were built in the 50s and 60s. And I don't know what the public support was like at that time, but also there was an obvious benefit that people got electricity when they didn't have electricity before.
Yeah.
Whereas now they say, well, I've got electricity. I don't want another pylon. I'm still going to have electricity if you don't. I don't care where it comes from. But if we can say you can have cheap electricity, maybe there's a way forward. People can actually feel like they're benefiting.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. We've got history of doing this, and we've got history of building stuff really quickly. But the world is a bit, it is different now, and
yes.
I think we're possibly a less sort of subservient society. We've got social media. It is harder, probably for good reasons, but just to kind of do stuff and do stuff to people, and I think people have to be brought
along.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, we actually published a report in the Energy Futures Lab earlier this year about the 2035 target as it was then, trying to identify the various sectors which was going well on and sectors which was going badly on. And sectors that were going well on tended to be a large amount of stuff like generation and so on. But sectors where it was going badly on, we had planning, obviously, we had public consent. We also had strategy, coordination and governance, which is an interesting one, because at the time the government felt a lot more disjointed, I think, than it is now with emission control and so on that we're seeing. We also had financing and workforce and supply chains, and these are the major areas that we found. And obviously, when 2030 coming up, these problems have become more and more acute.
Absolutely. I mean, I think those are all right, and they seem like very sort of solid aspects of the challenge. I mean, I think sort of thinking about that consumer angle, and this kind of why do we need consumers involved, and actually why do we need to bring consumers with us? We've done various bits of thinking about that, the more we think about it, the more essential it is. I mean, the kind of the bottom line is, if you do stuff to people and they don't like it, then they vote against it.
Yes, they are going to get their revenge in some way.
Yeah, and which is absolutely right. We've been actually really, really lucky, or if that's the right word, or it's been very positive that there has been general cross-party support for the kind of the net zero project. But that isn't a fixed thing. It could change, and I think as we see in other countries, these things come and then they go.
Do fracture.
And so I think it's not. That should be probably the central thing in people's mind is in decision makers' mind is are we gonna be able to keep people on board this? Because at the end of the day, we can't make people. We can't impose it on people.
No, not in a democratic society. We
can't. No. Exactly.
So, coming after that, so obviously we've got the planning situation, but where do you think the other major challenges are to bringing consumers along? Where do you think they're going to be the pinch points that government should be thinking about now?
Yeah, well, I think take a bit of a long way around this, but one of the things that I was most excited by in the in this report, the 2030 report, was around flexibility, and flexibility is the thing that lots of people have been talking about for a while, but it really is. That is how you can have a net zero power system. That's how you can have a net zero economy. Flexibility meaning that when you've got supply like wind, which you can't control, you need to be able to shift your demand around in order to best match that supply. And frankly, if you can't, then you're wasting a lot of the wind, or you're not being able to use. You're not going to be able to have electricity when you need it. So that demand flexibility, I think, is so important. But what does that mean? I mean, it means using electricity at different times, and that cannot mean sitting in the dark when there's not enough power. That's not the future. So the graph that I really found interesting was it showed the massive ramp up that's needed in this kind of demand flexibility for 2030, and including a big ramp up in that kind of consumer in household demand flexibility.
Because beforehand, often this flexibility is we have flexibility services, but a lot of them are done by large commercial and industrial customers, right?
Exactly. So that's something that if you can turn your machines off at night, or you can play around with it a bit, that with very limited impact on your productivity, or maybe no impact, you can make big savings. But this is then thinking about, well, actually, how about domestic consumers? So I think that kind of ambition is exactly right, and I think there are all sorts of reasons why that is deliverable. However, that looks like, well, hang on, that involves consumers somehow. How's that going to work? So I mean, that's one thing. But just added on to that, I think we're talking about 600,000 heat pumps a year by 2030 is what government wants.
Quite an astonishingly high target. I think we're less than a tenth of that now. Are we?
Probably, yeah. And then all EVs. I think 80% of EVs. 80% of cars to be electric vehicles by 2030.
New cars sold, yeah.
New cars sold, and then no new cars sold, no kind of conventional combustion engines sold from 2035 onwards.
And we're already seeing the car manufacturers balking a bit at this, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Those three things, that flexibility, the kind of the heat pumps, the EVs, that could be a massive change for people, on the face of it, you could say, well, is that possible? I think you can turn it around and say that there's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, because this is where the energy transition, I guess, really comes into people's houses. Because beforehand, as we said, a lot of it's happened offshore.
Yeah.
Like, I've looked out the window coming into Heathrow, and as you go over the Thames Estuary, there are huge numbers of wind farms you see there, which you're not really aware of in Britain, but they're gigantic, huge industrial structures there, solar panels and so on. But so far, decarbonisation has been relatively out of people's lives. Whereas here we're saying you're going to need to change your boiler to a heat pump, which might require a different way of thinking about heat. You're going to change your car to an EV, which requires a different way of thinking about your transportation and your refuelling needs.
Yeah.
And so suddenly it's going to impact on people's, well, not suddenly, but it's going to finally impact on people's lives in a more tangible way, I think.
Exactly. And so I think there's a word that I haven't quite managed to coin, but which is about, is it involvement? Is it engagement? I don't think it's engagement. Is it participation? Not necessarily, but something.
It's sort of Venn diagram within the middle.
And how to recognise that that shift, how to bring that those changes around. It I think is a really central question. Adding to that, consumers are all different. Everyone's got different circumstances. Consumer isn't this kind of one monotonous thing. People have different houses, different homes. People live in apartments. People live in houses. You have different amounts of technology.
Different amounts of technology awareness as well.
Different amounts of awareness, income levels, different amounts of savings. So all of these different things means that you can't think of that consumer as being just one thing. There are lots of different types. And I think really interestingly, I mean, Amazon has got this. They've got thousands of kind of consumer archetypes that they think about. I don't think the energy sector's quite recognised that yet, or if they have, they haven't kind of properly kind of started to deploy that.
No, the average energy supplier is one consumer archetype, the person who buys their own energy, and then they buy their energy and they pay for the energy, and that's it. But that's going to change, isn't it?
Well, I think it has to, and it's taking time, and I think still the way that we have the regulatory framework, the sort of the way we regulate energy suppliers does seem to tend towards that kind of one size fits all.
Yeah.
The regulator Ofgem is doing lots of work at the moment to think about how it can open up the market more and allow for different business models. But it does take time. We think that actually a more flexible type of arrangements for regulation could be good. Perhaps thinking about, you know, maybe regulating different electricity supply for different assets.
Yeah.
To have maybe different regulations. So if you're just doing an EV, an electric vehicle, maybe you can have a different regulatory framework to if you're providing electricity for the rest of the house, for example.
Well, exactly, yeah. And so let's take your first of these challenges about flexibility. And as you point out, there's huge savings, I guess, economic efficiency to be made here, because instead of matching supply to demand, we are attempting to sort of meet supply and demand in the middle.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are dynamic tariffs which charge you the amount of money that the electricity costs on the network. So when there's more winds and more renewables, you get cheaper energy. I mean, I'm on Octopus Agile, which does this every half an hour.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good. Like during the storm last weekend, I had negative electricity throughout most of the night, so I could turn my electric heater on or my dehumidifier on and get paid to do so. It's great. But at the moment, it's I think 36 pence I'm paying because of this Dunkelflaute we talked about.
Yeah.
So if I was at home using the energy, that's 36 pence, and we're not even in peak time.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, how does the average consumer navigate what is really quite a fast-changing thing? Is this sort of tariff suitable for the average person, or is it something that's needs to be obfuscated maybe a bit more?
Yeah, well, very good question, and I think I would take a guess that you're quite an engaged
I'm probably
consumer.
what you would call a sophisticated energy consumer
exactly.
in Martin Lewis's parlance. Yes,
exactly, and that's brilliant. And there are there are a proportion of the rest, the society that thinks like that. Probably most people would say they've got like better things in life to do than think about the price of the electricity, especially on a kind of hour by or half hour by half hour basis.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think it's great to have kind of people that are kind of first taking up these things, and definitely not to knock the innovation that's going on already. So it's brilliant. I think the agile tariff investment, over the past kind of 5-10 years, putting in the systems to allow for that to be possible has been really, really great, and probably, to my mind, one of the most sort of important changes that's happened
yes, because we
in
can't
the system.
do anything else without the fundamentals being there, the actual technology working. And
exactly.
I know Octopus themselves describe this as an experimental tariff, and you need to press quite a lot of confirmation boxes saying that you understand that it's an experimental tariff before they allow you to use it. Exactly. But it's brilliant that they've put in the sort of infrastructure to allow for that. But it won't. For many people, it might not be possible yet to make any. To take advantage of that. I mean, firstly, yes, there's the information and sort of awareness of it, but actually, if you don't have a flexible demand, as it were, so if you don't have an electric vehicle and you have your gas heating, most of your demand actually you won't be able to sort of do anything about. Exactly. I mean, you can basically choose when to use your washing machine or when to cook your food, but it's actually a relatively small amount of your overall demand. So
that's one thing to think about. And for those people at the moment, unless you have a shiftable demand, then you might not be able to make much of that. Another really big aspect is do you have a smart meter, and do you have a smart meter that works? And
yes, indeed.
and still, I think 40% of the country don't have a smart meter, and I think of all the smart meters out there, about 10% are not working properly. And to my mind, this is just kind of you just got to get that stuff to work. I mean, it's not rocket science. It shouldn't be a difficult challenge. It's just about getting that kind of basic infrastructure rolled out.
Because it's a bit like any sort of network, like say 3G or 4G. You can't have your phone app if you don't have a network to run it on.
Exactly.
And you can't have your smart towers if you don't have working smart meters.
Exactly. And I think there's been a lot of resistance to smart meters, partly through kind of misunderstanding, but there's been some quite good research to say once you've got one, you actually really value it, and especially if it allows you to unlock kind of smarter, cheaper tariffs.
Yes, it's interesting. If you go to comparison websites nowadays, a lot of the cheapest tariffs are smart meter only, even if they're not necessarily flexible. I guess it's beneficial to the energy company to have you having a smart meter installed.
Yeah, and that in some ways that's good. That's a bit of a push or a pull factor, so people say, actually, I really want a smart meter and so on. But I think the risk is that those people are not engaged or for all sorts of good reasons, or just don't have the time or aren't able to engage with it, get left out, and I think that's where we've got to watch out. But the more that we can mainstream these kinds of new propositions, new tariffs, I think the better. And just to say, it's really not a case of sort of sitting there and waiting for the price to go down and then you turn the light on. It's got to be automated. I think there's been lots of good research that's been going on over the last few years, which has been about sort of saying to people, can you turn down at this time? And it's been exciting to see that there's been a lot of people really responding to that, and maybe reducing their electricity load at certain times, and it's given a great, it's kind of shown us that can work. But the long term, the future, I don't think is going to be about people just saying, actually, I'm going to turn off my fridge at this time. It has to be done in a more automated way, which is where you've got your smart meter. It sends you a signal of what the tariff is. When it's high, automatically, your EV charger turns off, and when it's low, it will turn on again.
Yes.
And for an EV, it really doesn't matter. You can program it so that you can always have the electricity, the power that you need in there. And how you kind of roll that out to the rest of the household need is going to be the challenge. But I think that's possible. I think we'll see a huge huge developments in that. We're already seeing that in the heat pump world, where actually you can have flexibility in the heat pump electricity demand. So you doesn't always have to be pulling the electricity out. There could be times when it's less.
Yes, because I know that this is one of the concerns that traditionally electricity distribution operators have had with heat pumps, is that if they all turn on at the same time, because everyone's getting up at the same time, there's going to be a massitive peak load. If we can shift that out, it requires a lot less physical infrastructure, it requires a lot less generation time.
Exactly. And if we can get that all, if we can get the most out of that, then it means that then, when rather than having to have perhaps I don't know, it's 50 gigawatts of offshore wind. Maybe you need slightly less than that. But the most important thing is, how do you get the most out of what you've got?
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about making do, really, what you've got, which is a very British thing to think about it. So maybe we should be a bit more patriotic about it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the other thing is, I think getting the incentives right. So for you're quite engaged, and you can see actually sometimes electricity is more expensive, so it's a good time to turn stuff off, and sometimes it's cheaper. But at the moment, the incentives don't work kind of very well like that, and this is where I think market reform is really important. If you've got lots of wind in Scotland, it can't physically get down often down to London, but because it comes onto the grid, it pushes the price down, and then you're down in London, and you say, actually, now the price is low, it's a good time to charge my car up. But you're not getting the electricity from the offshore wind. You're going to have to turn on a gas plant in order to charge it.
Yeah, so the actual carbon goes up, the price goes up again, and
So I mean, and we've been pushing for this idea of having different prices in different parts of the country.
So locational pricing.
A locational model, and government is looking at that, but there has been quite a delay in thinking, in delivering on that.
Would that mean that energy is always really cheap in Scotland and really expensive in the southeast, or do you think it would be a bit more flexible than that?
Much more flexible. And actually, the models that we've looked at show that prices would go down in all parts of the country, not just in Scotland, but there would be a greater reduction in Scotland. And actually, in Scotland, you'd see the cheapest prices in Europe, basically.
Yeah, which I guess would be quite an incentive for industry to set up there.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And we've been looking quite a lot. There's been a lot in social media at the moment about industrial energy prices, and UK kind of
very high.
Very high, yeah. And that's not good for productivity at all. And if we want to, really think about growth, economic growth, energy and actually electricity will be the driver of that growth in the future. If you can get those prices down, then you can get yourself onto a higher growth rate. And definitely not to say that industry is all going to move, because there's all sorts of other things they're factoring in.
Workforce, capital.
But then there are perhaps hydrogen electrolyzers or data centers that might say, actually, I want to be where there's really cheap electricity,
cheap and green as well, nice low carbon, sustainable. So there's an awful lot of interesting stuff coming through. I guess we've got flexible tariffs, we've got, as you say, the idea of energy market reform, we've got this huge increase. So in 2030, what is the most exciting opportunities, do you think, for the energy consumer, I guess? Where do you see the real emergent business models and tariffs and other services coming in?
Well, I think there's always a danger of kind of crystal ball gazing, and I'm sure I'll get it wrong. But then the exciting things, I suppose, I can only look at what I'm seeing kind of coming through, and so it's the kind of, I suppose, the near future rather than the far future. But definitely the flexible tariff, I think that's got to be essential to the future. So something that gives you different price at different times of the day, but it allows you to optimize your energy use so that you can get the best out of it. And so it's definitely not saying you're going to kind of just turn off when the prices are high, but it will allow you. We're increasingly having so many batteries in our appliances and our products and stuff. So I think flexible tariffs. I think we've had this kind of dream of a kind of as a service energy tariff, which is basically saying, as a company, supply company will come in and say, we'll guarantee you this level of warmth in your home, and you pay this fixed amount of money, and we'll do all the back end stuff, so you don't have to worry about any of that, but you just get this kind of level of warmth. There are all sorts of challenges in realizing that, but ultimately that kind of outcome, that buying an outcome, I think is going to be something to work for.
So this is very much a sort of paradigm shift from buying a kilowatt hour, which you then decide what to do with, to actually say buying a house which is 20 degrees for 6 hours a day, and
exactly.
And I guess the same with electric vehicles, maybe the same with microgeneration or batteries and sort of integrated systems.
Exactly. I think that another one could be around, and maybe we're starting to see this a bit already, but it's slightly, it's kind of, it's not quite there yet, but a kind of type of use tariff. So a tariff for an electric vehicle. And some companies are already kind of emulating this, although the rules don't quite allow it to work properly yet. But this could open up really interesting ideas where you go and buy you go to the showroom to buy your electric vehicle. And you don't just buy an electric vehicle, you buy an electric vehicle that then's powered for the rest of its lifetime.
So you're basically buying a vehicle and the fuel as a sort of in the same lease, I guess.
Exactly. And everything all bundled in together. And that could be quite interesting for kind of what that means for, then you'd see, actually, this, although it looks like it's the upfront cost is more expensive, over the lifetime, it's actually much cheaper.
Yeah.
So and it could be just much simpler. So that's another one. And the final one I was going to mention is this idea of kind of peer-to-peer trading, where maybe you've got a solar panel and you're thinking, I'm not really making much money from this because I'm selling it back to the grid, but they're not giving me what I think I deserve. But actually, you're able to then sell it to your neighbour who doesn't have solar.
Yeah.
And that could be interesting, especially if you combine that with kind of community energy. And I think community energy, it's a great thing, but it's sometimes it's not giving value back to the system. It's a really great thing to do, and it gets people kind of together. But if you could have community energy that really provides value back to the energy system.
I guess its value is through deferred energy for the actual grid, so you're not using distribution network and transmission network assets to
exactly
power.
Yeah. So I think there are probably all sorts of other really exciting models out there that that I think are going to be if we can unlock these models with the right kind of regulatory framework. That's what's needed for getting that consumer shift. It's not about saying you have to do things and taking things away from people, although there is a role for that to some extent in terms of I think sorry to divert myself, but the electric vehicle sort of target and saying we're not going to be able to buy.
Yeah, you'll have to give up eventually on new petrol cars.
Yeah, I mean that, like it or loathe it, that has driven a big change in behaviour in driving and buying cars. But I think the fundamentally you want to get people to do things because they want to do things because it's better for them.
Yeah, we should be viewing this as an opportunity, something to do, something to develop further, basically.
Yeah. And I think suppliers and other players who are providing those kind of services have a really important role. And if they can be innovative and thinking about the consumer and what they really want, I think that's going to be a huge part of bringing them towards the.
Another thing I saw was the idea of a personalised time of use tariff. So when you sign up, you go, for example, if I work from home, or I work the night shift, or I got an EV, I've got kids, so I need to cook at this particular time. So you actually have a tariff which charges you more when you don't need it as much, maybe.
Yeah, I think all these things because just recognizing that different people will have just different needs.
Yeah, as we talked about, we're not just one consumer. The Amazon idea of hundreds, thousands of different consumer ideas, different age groups, different family circumstances. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So just to bring back to your work in the Energy Systems Catapult, what projects are you doing to look at some of this work?
Well, recently a couple of projects that have kind of looked at this. One I was going to mention, which is thinking about this market reform, and it's been a really difficult time in the energy sector because that market reform question has been quite divisive.
Yeah.
And so I did a piece of work that was looking at, well, how do you kind of take the heat out of that a bit by saying, if you're going to do the reform, you can protect those investors that invested on the basis of the old system, so that they don't actually lose out, that they feel actually bought into the future system. And so actually we found that even if you gave all this investment protection so that it doesn't affect the existing investors, you'd still see massive benefits to the system. So that was quite interesting. Another piece I'm doing is looking at the kind of, and it's very much in line of this kind of some of the stuff we've been talking about, but that the future kind of consumer-centric retail market. What does that really look like? And actually, how do we bring in new players into the market to unlock that? Because at the moment, as I say, we've got a system, the electricity retail regulation. It's quite dense. Maybe 10,000 pages. You got to be basically look like a supplier, as you know it, to be able to do it. But there are all sorts of really interesting other kind of products and kind of consumer-facing products that are produced by other companies. How do we bring those guys
how do you
more
lower
into
the barriers? I guess.
Lower the barriers, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because as you point out, the system is, I guess, needs to be more diverse, I guess, more 21st century.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Excellent. Well, we're nearly at the end of our time, but thank you very much for joining us. And I guess we just finish off by saying what's the single most exciting thing about the next 5 years, do you think?
The single most exciting thing about the next 5 years, I think this flexibility question, and I know I've talked about that a lot, but
it's really the crux of a lot of this, isn't it?
It really is, and once we can get the right pieces in the right place, I'm so excited by this idea of essentially free electricity being produced, because once you've set these wind farms up and solar up, you're getting free homegrown energy, and then if we can just calibrate our system so that we use it at the right time,
we can make so
you can
much,
make it really cheap.
I have a friend who has an old flat hole water tank, and he switched over to the Octopus Agile tariff, and he still could not get his head around negative electricity prices.
Exactly.
The idea of being able to basically get paid to heat his water up in the middle of the night is something which he found almost sort of magical. And why does this work? How does this work? Why is someone giving me electricity for minus money?
Exactly.
Why is someone paying me to use it?
Exactly.
So there's hopefully an awful lot of exciting opportunities like that for the rest of the country to find out.
Yeah, I know. I really hope so.
So, where could our listeners find out more about you and your work, basically, in the Energy Systems Catapult work?
Yeah,
on your website or?
At the website. I mean, I'd say Google Energy Systems Catapult. Energy Systems Catapult, you'll find us. I'd say if you're interested in taking part and just being part of this challenge, then sign up to the Living Lab. And we expect basically anyone that's got that buys electricity, welcome, or gas as well. And then if you're interested in some of our sort of modelling work, then the ESME, which is the Energy Systems Modelling Environment, is a really good one to look at. And
I think you can download the model, can't you, and play around with it
yourself?
you
can play around. Yeah, exactly.
If you've got the right kit.
But it's a really good way of looking. If you're thinking about the policy side, looking at kind of what policies would work. But if you're also sort of an innovator, looking at how would my kind of product work in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tom. Thanks for joining us. And
thank
that's
you.
Really fantastic. So really.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Energy Futures podcast. Here at Energy Futures Lab, we are dedicated to addressing global energy challenges through pioneering research, innovation, and advocacy. To learn more about us and the exciting projects we are working on, visit our website and follow us on social media. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest content.